In the deep quiet between stars, history is not written. It drifts, half-remembered, like dust caught in the gravity of forgotten worlds. The Imperium of man calls itself eternal, its truth unbroken, its memory unyielding. But even in a galaxy ruled by gods and war, there are absences. Places where the light of remembrance does not reach. Among the endless records of conquest, crusade, and divine proclamation, there are two names that were erased. Two sons who were once among the greatest creations of the Emperor of mankind. Two who now exist only in silence. They are known only by what remains, the Lost Primarchs. The Imperium does not speak of them. In the vaults of Terra, where golden light falls across endless data shrines, no record bears their names. In the halls of the Space Marines, where brothers still whisper of betrayal and devotion, none will say aloud what happened to the 2nd and 11th Legions. To speak of them is to court heresy. To remember them is to trespass upon the Emperor's will. Yet still their absence echoes through the ages, as if the galaxy itself cannot forget what has been removed. It begins, as all stories of the Imperium do, with the Emperor himself. A being of impossible age, born from the collective will of ancient humanity, sculpted by aeons of psychic convergence and war. He walked the earth before the stars had names, and when he turned his gaze to the void, he sought to shape his will into flesh, to create 20 sons, each an embodiment of his design, each destined to lead humanity into a new golden dawn. But of those 20 divine creations, only 18 are remembered. In the earliest days of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor strode across the galaxy with fire and purpose, each Primarch was more than a weapon. They were living ideals, genetic demigods whose souls burned with fragments of their creator's own. Some were scholars, others warriors, some poets, some monsters. Each a reflection of a part of his infinite mind. Yet perfection has never been a stable thing. In the crucible of creation, something went wrong. The story tells us that chaos, envious and fearful, reached into the Emperor's vaults before his children could take their first breath. The Primarchs were scattered, flung across the galaxy like embers torn from a flame. Some fell to savage worlds, others to empires long dead. And though the Emperor retrieved them one by one from the corners of the galaxy, not all stories ended in reunion. In the earliest records of the Great Crusade, there were 20 legions. 20 banners carried across the stars, 20 numbers engraved upon the walls of the Imperial palace. But as the ages turned and the wars multiplied, those numbers changed. The 2nd and the 11th disappeared from the rolls. Their symbols were scraped from the marble, their names erased from the data streams. To most of the Imperium, they never existed at all. This is the first silence, the first void in Imperial history, deliberate, absolute, and unquestioned. For in the Imperium, what is forgotten does not fade, it is destroyed. If you walk through the archives of Mars, where the red light hums against the relics of 1 billion years, you will find mention of them only as statistical absences, 2 gaps between the names of brother legions. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, it is a matter of record corruption. To the Inquisition, a forbidden curiosity. To the ordinary citizen of the Imperium, it is blasphemy to even ask. But to those who listen, to those who feel the tremor of silence beneath the endless hymns, there is something else, a feeling that this erasure was not merely punishment, but pain. The Emperor, for all his divinity, was not incapable of grief. Behind the golden mask of the Master of Mankind lies a truth the ecclesiarchy dares not preach. That the Emperor was once human. He knew love, he knew loss, and he knew the burden of creating life only to destroy it. When he struck the names of 2 sons from all record, it was not done out of rage alone. It was an act of mourning. The greatest of fathers burying his own children beneath eternity's silence. No one knows their faces, no one remembers their worlds, their deeds, or their sins. Some say they were monsters, mutations beyond redemption, flawed at birth and cast down before the Great Crusade began. Others whisper that they were too pure, too human, too unwilling to bow to the Emperor's vision of order. Perhaps they questioned him. Perhaps they refused his war. Or perhaps they saw what he would become and could not follow him into the pyre of empire. In the dark age that followed, the surviving Primarchs carried this secret like a wound. Once, long before the Horus heresy, Rogel Dorn is said to have asked the Emperor what had become of their lost brothers. The Emperor's reply was simple. "They are gone," he said, "and no more shall be spoken of them." Leman Russ, the Wolf King, would later remark that he had seen what happened to them, and that the sight still haunted him. These were not the words of myth, but of memory. The surviving sons remembered. They mourned, and they obeyed. For the Imperium, obedience is survival, even for gods. And so the story of the Lost Primarchs was buried beneath 10,000 years of silence. Yet silence is not death. Across the millennia, fragments have endured. A shattered mural here showing 20 golden figures. A page of corrupted data there listing 20 legions. The faint echo of a forgotten battle cry carved into a derelict fortress. It is as though the universe itself refuses to let them vanish entirely. Their absence has gravity, a pull that draws the curious, the faithful, and the heretical alike. There are worlds that speak of lost angels, statues with no names standing among those of the honored dead, fleets that carry the number 11 upon their hulls, their crew unaware of its forbidden origin. Some say the lost sons were not destroyed but cast out, that they linger still, leading exiled legions among the stars beyond the Emperor's light. Others whisper that they were erased not because they failed, but because they succeeded in a way the Imperium could not tolerate. To understand the mystery of the Lost Primarchs is to confront the nature of the Imperium itself. A civilization built not upon truth, but upon the control of truth. In a galaxy where gods walk among men, faith becomes more powerful than memory. If the Emperor declared that 2 of his sons never existed, then, in the eyes of the Imperium, they truly never did. And yet to deny existence is to create myth. To strike out a name is to make it holy. Perhaps that is why the mystery endures, because even silence can be worshipped. There is something haunting in the idea of being erased by your own father. To live, to fight, to bleed, to love, and then to be unmade not by death but by decree. It is a cruelty only gods can commit. And yet in that cruelty there is also a strange mercy. For the Lost Primarchs were spared the fate of their brothers. They were not torn apart in the fires of the Horus heresy. Their legions did not drown in betrayal. Their names did not become curses upon 1,000 tombs. Perhaps the Emperor's silence was the only salvation he could offer. The galaxy moves on, and the records remain blank. But within that blankness, a shape can still be seen, faint, like a ghost behind glass. The Imperium cannot erase the shadow of its own sins, and somewhere, perhaps beyond the Astronomican's reach, beyond the light of Terra, beyond even the madness of the warp, 2 forgotten sons dream of a father who no longer remembers their faces. The silence of the Emperor is not absence. It is weight. It is intention. It is the kind of silence that shapes history without words. For in the Imperium of man, what is said is law, but what is unsaid defines eternity. And so the story begins, not with a name, but with its removal, not with creation, but with forgetting. In the void between truth and myth, between God and man, the Lost Primarchs remain. Forgotten, but not gone. Before there were Primarchs, there was an idea. It was not born of love nor of vanity, but of design. The Emperor, in his endless vision, saw humanity scattered and decaying, eaten alive by its own wars. To unify such a species would require more than leadership. It would require symbols. Beings who could inspire devotion and fear in equal measure. Flesh-shaped from perfection, capable of carrying divine purpose across the stars. And so, in the hidden forges beneath Terra, the Emperor began his great experiment. There are few who can imagine what it means to create gods. In the stillness of those vaults, beneath continents of ash and glass, the Emperor worked in silence. He was not alone. The gene-smiths, adepts, and savants who served him never spoke of what they saw. Some whispered that the air itself burned with psychic fire, that light bent around his form, that his words were not heard but felt within the mind. They called him the master of mankind, but to those who labored closest to him, he was something beyond even that, a mind vast enough to hold both creation and annihilation. The Primarchs were not built as men are built. They were not born but assembled from a design both scientific and sacred. Each was a fragment of his will, drawn from 1,000 genetic templates and psychic signatures refined until their bodies could channel not only human potential, but the psychic resonance of divinity itself. Each would embody a facet of the Emperor's purpose. One would be strength, one would be knowledge, one would be faith, and others would embody the terrible necessity of conquest. Together they would lead humanity into unity. They would be the 20 suns around which the new Imperium would orbit. Yet, even in creation, the warp was watching. The warp is not a place, but a hunger, the sea of souls where thought becomes storm and will becomes weapon. When the Emperor reached into that ocean to draw power for his designs, something looked back. The Chaos Gods, ancient parasites of emotion and belief, sensed his interference. They saw the Primarchs as threats, and the Emperor's vision as blasphemy. To bring order to the universe was to starve them of their food. So they reached into his vaults with unseen hands, scattering his creations before they could take their first breath. The capsules that held the Primarchs were cast into the warp, torn from their maker's grasp, hurled across the galaxy like meteors. Each landed on a distant world, alien and hostile, where the sons of the Emperor would grow in isolation. Some would rule empires, others would be raised by beasts or gods. When the Emperor finally found them, years, centuries had passed, and each son had become something shaped not by his hand, but by fate itself. In time, he found 18 of them, and each reunion was a story written in blood and fire. But there were two whose worlds were never found, whose signals never answered, whose names were never spoken again. Their capsules, like their legions, vanished into the void. Even the Mechanicum's most ancient records admit that 2 genetic lines were never completed. It is as if the warp itself devoured them before birth. Or perhaps the Emperor, knowing what they would become, erased them by his own hand before history could write their names. The Emperor's work continued. He forged the Space Marine legions from the genetic seed of his sons, armies of superhuman warriors who bore echoes of their Primarch's nature. Each legion was a reflection of its father, magnified and multiplied. But when the Imperium first marched upon the stars, 20 legions were numbered. The 2nd and 11th were as real as the rest. They fought, they conquered, and for a time they were part of the Great Crusade. Their banners flew beside those of their brothers, and then they were gone. Those who study such forbidden history whisper of anomalies in the earliest expedition logs, fleets that fought alongside legions whose numbers no longer exist, campaigns credited to commanders without recorded names, entire sectors pacified by ghost forces whose heraldry was later replaced or burned away. The official record claims clerical error, but the older texts, those buried under vaults of heresy and dust, tell another story. That something went wrong, not with the Emperor's plan, but with his children. The Primarchs were never meant to be equal. Each was given a fragment of the Emperor's perfection, but no single being could contain the full measure of his will. Some bore too much ambition, others too much empathy. Too much. The Emperor did not create sons. He created aspects of himself, splintered and amplified. To make 20 such beings was to create 20 potential gods, each capable of reshaping humanity in their own image. Perhaps it was inevitable that some would fall too far or shine too brightly. The legends of the early Crusades speak of triumph. The galaxy burned with conquest. Worlds that had forgotten humanity's name were brought to heel beneath banners of gold. The Emperor walked among mortals radiant as the sun. Yet even in those days of glory there were whispers. Fleets lost without cause. Entire regions struck from the charts. The Primarchs themselves grew uneasy. For all their strength, they could not understand why 2 of their brothers were gone, and why none were permitted to speak of them. Some say that the Emperor erased the Lost Primarchs because he saw in them a reflection of his own failure. Others claim they defied him, perhaps questioning the morality of his crusade or seeking to shape their legions by their own design. In the Imperium, there is no greater heresy than independence. To stand against the Emperor is to invite annihilation, but it is also said that he was capable of mercy. And mercy in the Emperor's language might mean silence. It is strange to think that perfection could breed imperfection. But in the grim order of the galaxy, that is the oldest law. Even the stars die, even gods err. And in the Emperor's laboratory, where faith and science became one, perhaps the same hand that forged the angels of humanity also birthed its first ghosts. When the Emperor gazed upon his finished sons, he saw both salvation and doom. To rule the galaxy would require will beyond comprehension. But to control the wills of 20 demigods, each born of his own mind, was to challenge destiny itself. The Emperor's genius was creation. His tragedy was believing that creation could be controlled. Across the millennia, the Mechanicum still recites fragments of the original genetic hymn used in the Primarch project. The words are almost lost, but one phrase endures: "They were not made to serve. They were made to become." That is the paradox that haunts the Imperium. In making gods to lead men, the Emperor ensured that even his own creations would one day test the boundaries of his dominion. And perhaps 2 of them stepped beyond those boundaries, into the one place even the Emperor could not reach, beyond memory itself. There are theories that the Lost Primarchs were purged long before the Horus Heresy, that they and their legions were annihilated quietly during the early Crusades. If true, then it would mean the Emperor's greatest act of secrecy predates his son's rebellion by centuries. Some imagine the lost legions consumed by chaos, their loyalty twisted before the Imperium had even taken shape. Others believe the opposite, that they saw the warp's corruption and fled, choosing exile over heresy. The truth is unknowable. What remains certain is the Emperor's reaction: erasure. Total, absolute, divine silence. The Imperium would carry that silence forever. Every record amended, every memory reshaped, until even the most devout believed there had only ever been 18. And yet, in the secret hearts of those who remember, a question lingers. What flaw could drive the Emperor to destroy his own children? What transgression could be so great that even their existence was an offense to creation? The answer may lie not in what they did, but in what they revealed. The Emperor's sons were designed to embody aspects of his being: strength, reason, war, order, compassion. Perhaps the lost ones embodied aspects he could not bear to face: doubt, fear, regret. What if their flaw was not corruption, but humanity? If they reminded him of what he once was, a man, not a god, then perhaps their erasure was not punishment, but denial. The galaxy remembers through stories, and stories resist silence. Though their names are gone, their absence shapes everything that came after. The Horus Heresy, the fall of the legions, the endless wars of the Imperium, all carry the ghost of this first sin. The Emperor created sons to lead mankind to perfection, but in losing two, he revealed the truth. Perfection cannot exist where love and pride collide, and so the Lost Primarchs remain as they were born, symbols of the Emperor's will and of his failure. The sons of divine intention undone by their own existence. It is said that in the warp, echoes never fade. Perhaps their voices still linger, faint but unbroken, carried on tides of thought and time. Perhaps they whisper to their brothers or to the Emperor himself, reminding him that creation is not control, and that even gods must one day answer to what they have made. For now, the Imperium endures and its silence holds. The Emperor sits upon his throne, unmoving, unseeing, sustained by worship and machinery. Around him, the galaxy burns in endless war. But beneath it all, in the deep hum of eternity, there remains a question without answer, a name without a voice, and a love without forgiveness. Two sons lost to memory, but never to meaning. The sons of the divine will. In the archives of the Imperium, numbers have meaning. They are carved into banners, recited in catechisms, woven into the very hymns of devotion. Numbers carry identity, lineage, faith. They are the structure upon which eternity is built. And yet, among all those countless inscriptions, there are two numbers that no one speaks aloud: the 2nd and the 11th, the missing legions, the erased sons. To most within the Imperium, they are not even a rumor. The records have been rewritten so perfectly that for 10,000 years their absence is seen as design. 20 were made, the priests say. 18 remained. The Emperor's work is flawless. To question this is to question God himself. And in a galaxy ruled by faith rather than truth, questions are heresy. But to those who have seen the oldest records, who have touched the cracked slates and burned vellum of the earliest crusade, the truth cannot be denied. There were once 20. The evidence lingers like ghosts trapped in the machine. In expedition logs, 20 fleet insignias appear. In the earliest edition of the Codex Astartes, 2 entire legions are indexed, their data expunged, but their numerical placeholders left behind. In the first prayers taught to the legions of men, there were 20 names to honor, not 18. The pattern is too perfect to be error, the wound too deliberate to be accident. Even in the time of the Great Crusade, whispers persisted. The Primarchs themselves knew. They felt it in the rhythm of their brotherhood, in the absence that should have been filled. 20 voices had once been meant to speak in council. 18 remained, and among them the memory of those 2 absent presences burned like unseen stars. When the Emperor walked among them, he never spoke of it. When questioned, he would turn his gaze away, his expression unreadable behind golden light. And still the sons wondered. Horus, ever the most beloved, once asked what had become of their brothers. The Emperor's answer was neither comfort nor denial. "They are gone," he said, "and they will not return." The words carried weight heavier than any decree. It was not simply loss, it was obliteration. Not death in battle, but the annihilation of existence itself. From that moment on, no one asked again. The legions were family. For all their divine design, the Primarchs were brothers bound by more than creation. They had shared purpose, shared blood, shared the impossible burden of embodying the will of a god. To lose 2 among them was like losing a piece of themselves. It is said that even after the erasure, some would leave 2 empty chairs at council. Others, like Magnus the Red, would avoid speaking of numbers entirely, referring to the legions by name alone, as if saying 18 might betray something best left buried. The silence became a ritual. Across the Imperium, every record was amended, every monument recarved. The marble inscriptions that once bore 20 names were ground to dust. the empty spaces filled with fresh stone. The banners of the lost legions were burned in sanctified flame. Even their gene seed, the sacred material from which all space marines are born, was purged from the vaults of Mars. The Mechanicum erased entire datasets claiming corruption by the warp. What could not be destroyed was locked behind cryptographic seals so ancient that not even the tech priests remember the language of their encryption. Only the Emperor, and perhaps a few of his closest sons, knew the truth. But the galaxy has a way of remembering what it is told to forget. In some corners of the Imperium, remnants endure, a scrap of painted armor bearing a legion number no longer recognized, a cathedral mural with two shadowed figures painted over in black, a cogitator record too damaged to be fully erased, showing the numbers 2 and 11 beside names lost to time. The evidence is faint, but it whispers all the same. For every attempt to destroy memory leaves behind the shape of its absence. To erase is to confess. The Imperium, in hiding the truth, reveals it. There are accounts, apocryphal but persistent, of Imperial veterans who claim to have fought beside legions that no longer exist. They spoke of warriors whose heraldry bore twin suns or a serpent devouring its tail. Others recalled markings of blue and silver, or black armor adorned with crimson stars. Such stories were dismissed as delusions, the ravings of old soldiers haunted by the warp. But among them runs a common thread, the sense of reverence, of loss, of something sacred destroyed by decree. The remaining Primarchs reacted to the loss in silence, but their silence spoke volumes. Some grieved, some grew fearful, some took the erasure as a warning. When the Emperor ordered the expungement, none dared oppose him. Even Lorgar, whose devotion bordered on madness, knew that to question the divine will was to risk sharing the same fate. But there are moments recorded in the heresy-era texts where regret breaks through the myth. Dorn and Russ, both unwavering in loyalty, are said to have spoken privately about their lost brothers. Russ called it a lesson written in pain. Dorn said it was the price of perfection. Between them, the implication is clear. Whatever the lost sons had done, it had been unforgivable. And yet to erase one's children is an act of desperation. If the Emperor truly destroyed them, then he did so not only to cleanse the Imperium of their presence, but to protect it from the truth of their fall. Perhaps their sin was not rebellion, but revelation. Perhaps they saw something the Emperor wished no one else to see. Something about his plan, something about the warp, something about what it means to be made in his image. The historians of the Ordo Astartes, those rare few who dare to speculate, suggest that the lost legions were struck from record during the Great Crusade itself, before the heresy, before the Emperor's retreat to Terra. That would mean the wound in the Brotherhood came early, shaping all that followed. To live with absence is to live with longing, and longing in beings of such power is dangerous. The seeds of Horus's rebellion, of Kurz's madness, of Fulgrim's corruption may all have been sown in that first silence. The Primarchs were not just soldiers, they were emotional beings of immense psychic resonance. To make them grieve even subconsciously was to crack the foundation of the Imperium's unity. In the archives of the Ultramarines, there are fragments of speeches delivered by Guilliman himself, preserved through 10,000 years of translation. In one, he says, "We are the sons who remain, the ones who endure. Let us not fail as they did, no names, no context, just a ghostly echo of something he could not say aloud." It is as if every Primarch carried the memory, unspoken but inescapable, like a scar carved into the soul. The 18 and the 2 became the structure of the Imperium's theology of perfection. The Ecclesiarchy teaches that 18 were chosen and 2 were cast down, an allegory for faith and doubt. In sermons across the galaxy, priests speak of the lost legions not as history, but as metaphor. They are the sins of pride and disobedience given form, the parts of humanity that must be cut away to preserve the divine order. But this is not faith, it is propaganda. Even within the Imperium's machinery of worship, the truth strains against its chains. The metaphors are too precise, too insistent, too defensive. They exist because something real once demanded explanation. When the Space Marines of later chapters recite their oaths, they still number themselves in the shadow of 20. Their genetic lines, traced back to their Primarchs, still contain the ghost of that missing count. The Ultramarines know they are the 13th, the Dark Angels the 1st, the Blood Angels the 9th. But between the 1st and the 20th, there remain two gaps that no one can explain. It is a silence too perfect to be accidental, too symmetrical to be natural. It is the silence of design, a silence maintained not by ignorance but by will. For the Imperium, will is everything. The Emperor's will shapes reality. The faith of trillions sustains his life. The obedience of billions maintains his rule. If he decreed that two of his sons never existed, then their non-existence becomes law, their memory heresy, their names poison. But even divine will cannot unmake truth, it can only bury it. There are places in the galaxy where silence is dangerous. On the dead world of Calapis, 4 explorers found a vault sealed since the days of the Crusade. Inside, they uncovered frescoes depicting 20 figures standing before the Emperor. 18 could be identified by their heraldry. 2 were faceless, their features scraped away. The fresco was ordered destroyed by the Inquisition within a week of its discovery. But images of it still circulate in forbidden data markets, traded like relics. In the painted lines of those erased figures, some see not shame, but sorrow, as if the artist mourned the act of forgetting even as he obeyed it. Perhaps that is the true power of the Lost Primarchs. Not their deeds, not their wars, but their absence. They remind the galaxy that even in an age of gods, there are still secrets that cannot be controlled. They are the quiet proof that the Emperor's perfection was not complete, that even he, the master of mankind, knew regret. Their silence is his confession. The 18 and the 2, a phrase that should not exist yet refuses to vanish. It is a riddle, a warning, and a prayer all at once. In it lies the essence of the Imperium itself, glory built on denial, truth buried beneath gold. The 2 who were lost define the 18 who remain. Their absence shapes everything that follows. Without the silence of the lost, the noise of the Imperium would have no meaning. And somewhere in the eternal hum of the warp, perhaps the lost sons still hear the voices of their brothers calling to them across time. Perhaps in dreams they remember who they were. And perhaps when the Emperor dreams on his golden throne, he remembers them too. Forgotten but not forgiven, erased but not gone. The Imperium is built upon remembrance. Every cathedral, every shrine, every world conquered in its name is a monument to memory. Yet beneath the endless sermons and illuminated histories, there is a darker truth. The Imperium does not preserve memory to understand the past. It preserves only that which serves its faith. Everything else is purged, rewritten, or simply forgotten. The Imperium does not fear ignorance. It fears knowledge that cannot be controlled. To understand the erasure of the Lost Primarchs, one must first understand the machinery of forgetting. In the time before the heresy, record keepers of the Administratum catalogued every act of conquest, every oath sworn by a legion. The data towers of Terra rose into the sky like pillars of light, each carrying the sum of human achievement. To alter such a record was not merely a bureaucratic act, it was an act of godhood. To erase an entire lineage from that structure required the will of the Emperor himself, and he willed it, completely. When the order came, it did not pass through channels or decrees. It came as silence, the kind of silence that moves like a shadow, felt but unseen. Records vanished overnight, Whole archives sealed under decree of the sigillite, names stripped from stone, banners turned to ash. It was not destruction, it was precision. The kind of precision that only divine authority can achieve. The Imperium's greatest weapon has never been its fleets or its armies. It has always been its ability to make its version of the truth absolute. The erasure of the Lost Primarchs was the first test of that power, and it succeeded. The Emperor's silence became law. The administratum learned quickly that to ask was to invite extinction. Those who maintained records of the early crusade quietly replaced the numbers, adjusting ledgers and rosters until the count aligned. On Mars, the tech priests sealed the genetic vaults, erasing the sequences of 2 legions. The Mechanicum's data canticles, once sung with 20 verses, were rewritten to 18. To the soldiers of the Imperium, it was as if the 2 had never existed. And to those few who remembered, obedience demanded they pretend to forget. The Imperium does not delete because it doubts. It deletes because it believes. Faith in the Emperor requires certainty. The galaxy is too vast, too broken, too maddening to tolerate ambiguity. Every contradiction must be smoothed, every deviation corrected. The erasure of the Lost Primarchs was not simply an act of punishment. It was a reaffirmation of perfection. If the Emperor's work was divine, it could not produce failure. Therefore, failure could not exist. Therefore, the lost sons could not exist. The logic is circular, but within the Imperium, circular logic is indistinguishable from faith. And yet, faith is fragile. Even as the erasure took hold, cracks appeared. In the scattered memories of veterans who had fought beside the lost legions, there remained a quiet ache. They could not name what was missing, but they felt its absence like phantom pain. The Astartes who served under other Primarchs carried a strange unease, as though the brotherhood had been broken before it had truly formed. None could say it aloud, but all knew. The 18 marched forward beneath banners that hid 2 empty spaces. In the earliest years of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor still walked among men, the Primarchs were more than generals. They were symbols of divine harmony. Together they represented unity, the Emperor's will made flesh. When 2 of them vanished, that harmony was shattered. To conceal that fracture, the Imperium turned to its oldest remedy, ritual. Where memory fails, ritual sustains belief. So the silence became ceremony. Every recitation of the Imperial Creed omits 2 names, but pauses for them. Every muster of the Astartes leaves 2 numbers unspoken, but acknowledged in rhythm. Even in absence, they are honored, because the Imperium cannot truly forget. It can only pretend. To erase something utterly is to remove its shadow, and shadows are stubborn things. Those who study the hidden archives of the Inquisition, the Ordo Historia, the scholars of forbidden truth, describe the erasure as a psychic scar upon the Imperium itself. When billions are commanded to forget, that command ripples through the warp. Belief shapes reality, and in the Warhammer of gods and souls, memory is power. The Emperor's silence may have been an act of mercy, but it left a wound in the collective soul of mankind. The absence of 2 sons echoes in every prayer, every hymn, every act of devotion. It is the silence between words, the stillness between gunfire, the quiet before the next crusade begins. And perhaps that is the truest horror. The Imperium does not see the loss as tragedy. It sees it as necessity. It has made forgetting a sacrament. In its theology, ignorance is not weakness. It is faith. To know too much is to invite corruption. To question is to risk madness. And so the machinery of forgetting continues, powered by obedience and fear. Even the Primarchs obeyed it. They carried the memory but never spoke it. Not out of cowardice, but out of reverence. In them, the Emperor's will was absolute, and yet in the rare moments when they let the mask slip, the sorrow remained. When Dorn spoke to Russ, he called the loss a lesson. When Russ spoke to the wolf priests, He told them that the emperor had shown him something that broke his heart. Neither elaborated, neither had to. They had seen the price of disobedience. They had seen what it meant to fall short of divinity. There are those who argue that the erasure was not punishment at all, but mercy, that the emperor saw what awaited his sons, the betrayals, the heresy, the endless wars, and chose to spare 2 of them that fate. Perhaps he sent them away, out beyond the edge of the galaxy, into some far exile where they could live unburdened by destiny. Perhaps the erasure was his way of protecting them. If so, then the greatest act of love in the history of mankind was recorded as deletion, the greatest mercy mistaken for destruction. But love is not a language the Imperium understands. The Imperium speaks only in absolutes: loyalty or treason, light or darkness, existence or oblivion. To spare something is to destroy it in secret. To forgive is to erase. The Emperor, god of mankind, practiced both perfectly. Across the millennia, the archives remain clean. The official histories of the Adeptus Terra contain no contradiction. To the common citizen, the idea of missing Primarchs is as absurd as suggesting the Emperor could fail. The ecclesiarchy ensures that this truth remains buried beneath worship. But among the inquisitors, the historians, the keepers of forbidden lore, the silence is deafening. They know that something was removed not simply from records but from reality itself. They feel the weight of it every time they open a file that begins at Legion 3 instead of 2. And in that weight, they hear the echo of a god's regret. There are legends that the act of erasure itself wounded the Emperor, that in deleting the existence of his sons, he tore away part of his own psychic essence. The throne of Terra was said to hum differently in those years, its golden aura dimmed. Those close to him claimed his expression grew distant, his voice quieter. Whether this is truth or myth does not matter. It reveals a deeper faith, that even in his divinity, the Emperor is capable of grief. The Imperium calls it strength. But it is not strength to bury memory. It is fear. Fear of imperfection, fear of doubt, fear that the Emperor's light might cast shadows even upon itself. The erasure of the Lost Primarchs is the most human thing the Emperor ever did. It is the act of a father who could not face what he had made, and that, perhaps, is why it was hidden. Today, 10,000 years later, the silence still holds. The priests still pause between 18 and 20. The banners of the Astartes still skip 2 numbers. The songs of worship still carry 2 missing verses. The Imperium has forgotten how to forget, but it continues the ritual out of habit, not memory. Somewhere deep within that repetition lies the truth, that erasure is not the same as absence, and silence is not the same as peace. When the Emperor's mind drifts within the psychic immensity of the throne, perhaps he hears them still. 2 voices, faint but persistent, carried through the warp. Not accusing, not pleading, merely waiting. Waiting for the day when memory will no longer be forbidden and the galaxy will speak their names again. The Imperium will not remember them willingly. But memory has a way of returning even to gods. History in the Imperium is not a record, it is a weapon. It is wielded by those in power, sharpened by priests and buried by decree. Yet even weapons rust, even silence decays. For every secret buried beneath Terra's catacombs, there are echoes that refuse to fade. The truth of the Lost Primarchs lingers not in the open archives or illuminated manuscripts of the ecclesiarchy, but in the broken fragments that survived the first purge. Fragments too small to erase, too dangerous to acknowledge. The first of these whispers comes from the Age of Darkness, the shadow that fell over the galaxy after the Horus heresy. When brother turned against brother, when the Emperor's dream was broken and his sons became legends of tragedy and ruin. In that time of ruin, many records that had been sealed or forbidden began to surface once more, like corpses rising in a flood. Among them were hints of something older, something deeper than even the heresy itself. Some inquisitorial scholars claim that before the heresy, before Horus fell, the Imperium had already known betrayal. They speak of 2 campaigns erased not by Chaos or Xenos, but by the Emperor's own hand. 2 crusades that ended not in victory, but in silence. The details are lost, buried in the ciphers of the Sigillites' archives, but the shape of the story remains. 2 legions recalled to Terra, never seen again. 2 Primarchs summoned home, their worlds abandoned, their names struck out. It is said the warp storms burned bright that day, as if the universe itself protested their passing. From the mouth of Rogel Dorn comes one of the few surviving testimonies. When pressed by a remembrancer during the early days of the heresy, he is said to have uttered a single line, "I will not speak of them." The pain is too close a strange confession from a man of iron loyalty and cold precision. Pain implies love. It implies loss. Dorn was not a being given to sentiment. For him to call it pain meant it was personal. Leman Russ spoke too, though his words were less direct. "I saw the wolves unleashed," he once said to his priests, "and I swore I would never see it again." Some interpret this as a confession, that the Space Wolves, the Emperor's executioners, had once been sent against their own brothers. That the Lost Primarchs and their legions were not consumed by chaos, but destroyed by the Imperium itself. If so, then their sin was not corruption, it was defiance. And the price for defiance in the Emperor's court was annihilation. There is a pattern in Imperial punishment. When the Emperor chooses to destroy, he does not simply kill. He erases. The memory of the condemned becomes more dangerous than their deeds. To remember them would invite comparison, compassion, or doubt. So he removes even the possibility of remembrance. The 2 lost legions may not have died as traitors. They may have been unmade as warnings. The Mechanicum's secret vaults contain data slates corrupted by time and radiation. Some have been partially recovered by magi who dared to look where others would not. One such fragment, found on the wreck of a Crusade-era warship, describes the Erethian Compliance, a campaign unlisted in any official record. It references the 2nd and 11th, their designations unredacted, fighting side by side against an unnamed foe. The fragment ends abruptly with a single sentence: "The Emperor was displeased." What followed, no one knows. Other records speak of the Council of Nicaea, where the Emperor forbade the use of psychic powers among the legions. During that council, Magnus the Red, always too perceptive for his own safety, is said to have paused before his brothers and spoken words that chilled even the custodes. "Shall we pretend," he asked, "that we have not done this before? That punishment is new?" The silence that followed was heavy. Even the Emperor did not answer him. If the Lost Primarchs fell, then their fall shaped everything that came after. Perhaps it was their failure that led to the Emperor's growing distrust, his retreat from humanity, his increasing isolation from the very sons he had made. Perhaps the destruction of the lost legions taught him that love was weakness, that mercy invited rebellion. If so, then the death of 2 sons became the seed of the heresy itself. The heresy was not born in a single act of betrayal. It was the slow unraveling of faith. Faith between brothers, faith between sons and father. If the Emperor had erased 2 of his own long before Horus turned, then every Primarch would have carried that memory in his heart, the knowledge that even loyalty could end in oblivion. What does a child think when he learns his father is capable of forgetting him? That knowledge, whispered in the right ear, could break even the strongest heart. Perhaps Horus did not invent rebellion, perhaps he inherited it. In the quiet years after the heresy, when the galaxy still burned with the ashes of loyalty and loss, the first forbidden archives began to circulate among the Inquisition. They were incomplete, fragmentary, half-crazed recollections from servants of the lost legions or fragments of reports written in codes no longer used. Some described the Second Legion as too human, too compassionate for the Emperor's purpose. Others described the 11th as too wild, too close to the chaos they were made to fight. It is impossible to know if any of this is true. The truth in the Imperium is not found in facts, but in the weight of belief. There are even stranger whispers, darker ones, tales of two worlds whose populations vanished overnight, their skies turned red, their oceans boiled away. The Mechanicum claims it was solar flare activity. The Inquisition calls it myth, but the records of nearby systems note something peculiar. For weeks afterward, astropathic transmissions were filled with whispers. Two voices, layered and distant, repeating the same phrase. "We are still his sons." Those transmissions were purged, of course, but a few copies survived. They circulate in the under-networks of the Ordo Obscurus, studied by those who still dare to ask the forbidden question: what if the Lost Primarchs were never destroyed? What if their erasure was only the first step in some deeper plan? Some point to the Emperor's secrecy, to his refusal to speak even to Malkador as evidence that he did not destroy them but hid them, that they serve still somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy, in exile or in waiting. If this is true, then the Imperium's greatest mystery is not a tragedy but a prophecy. Two lost sons waiting for the day their father awakens. Two warriors who will return when the Emperor rises to complete what was begun. But this is heresy. To even think it is heresy. And yet, the whispers persist. In the dark corners of the Scholastica Sicana, students still tell each other the story of the sleeping brothers. Two spirits that wander the Astronomicon, unseen but felt, guiding lost ships through the warp. Some captains claim that when all other light fades, they see two figures standing on the prow of their vessel, hands raised as if shielding them from the storm. Such tales are dismissed as superstition. But superstition is only heresy that has survived long enough to feel like truth. The Age of Darkness is filled with ghosts, and not all of them are dead. The Lost Primarchs may have been erased from every record, but their absence shaped the choices of every brother who remained. In that silence, the seeds of tragedy were sown. Every betrayal that followed carried the echo of that first disappearance. The Emperor had taught his sons that obedience mattered more than love, and so they obeyed him, even into rebellion. When the Emperor finally fell upon the Golden Throne, his sons scattered, some to redemption, others to damnation. The Imperium rose again from the ashes, preaching unity, proclaiming perfection. But beneath every sermon, the same quiet question lingered. If the Emperor could erase his sons once, could he do it again? And if he could, what does that say of the faith that sustains him? The Lost Primarchs are more than history. They are warning. They are prophecy. They are the shadow that follows divinity. For every god must have its flaw, every light its darkness, every memory its silence. And so the whispers remain, not written in archives or carved into stone, but carried in dreams, in fears, in the half-remembered songs of men who will never know why two numbers were forgotten. They endure because the Imperium cannot exist without them. The silence of the lost is the heartbeat of its faith. They are the proof that the Emperor is not perfect. And in a galaxy built upon his perfection, that may be the most dangerous truth of all. There is no greater heresy in the Imperium than to ask why. Yet that single question, why two sons were erased, has whispered through the centuries, passed from one forbidden scholar to another like a dying ember hidden in the folds of faith. It has no single answer. Instead, it has become a garden of speculation, grown wild in the dark. In the absence of truth, the Imperium's silence has given birth to myth. And myth, in this age of dying stars, is the only way the galaxy remembers. Among those who dare to think, there are three dominant theories. None can be proven and all could be true. The first is the oldest and most terrible. The belief that the Lost Primarchs fell to chaos before the galaxy had even learned their names. It is a story of pride, of corruption, of the Emperor's greatest fear realized in his first creations. According to this theory, the Lost Sons were flawed from the beginning. Not because the Emperor failed, but because the warp touched them too deeply. They were not scattered like their brothers. They were claimed. Born on worlds already steeped in madness, nurtured by false gods, their bodies perfect but their souls tainted. When the Emperor finally found them, they did not kneel. They stood before him, radiant and terrible, and offered him their own vision of dominion. The Emperor could not allow it. He struck them down, their legions with them, and ordered every trace of their existence obliterated. The Great Crusade would continue as if they had never existed. The Emperor would pretend perfection had never faltered. There is power in this version. It suits the Imperium's nature. It preserves the Emperor's divinity by cloaking his violence in necessity. The Lost Sons become cautionary symbols, the proof that corruption must be purged before it spreads. The idea that they fell to chaos justifies every purge that followed, every world burned, every heretic silenced. It explains why the Space Wolves were created as executioners, why the Inquisition was born from secrecy, why faith requires blood. But it also raises an unbearable question. If corruption touched the Primarchs before the heresy, then chaos did not wait for Horus. It was present from the very beginning. It means the Emperor's greatest war was not against the Xenos or the traitor. It was against his own creation. The second theory speaks of mercy rather than corruption. It suggests the Lost Primarchs were not destroyed but spared, that they were not failures, but too pure, too human, too dangerous in their compassion. In this telling, the Emperor's sons were not born to be monsters. They were born to be men. The Lost Ones refused the cruelty of the Great Crusade, refused to burn worlds that would not kneel, refused to turn humanity into empire. They saw in their father's plan not salvation but tyranny. And when they spoke against it, when they asked him to stop, he could not bear the sound of his own conscience echoing back to him. So he silenced them. The Emperor, unable to destroy what he still loved, sent them away. He erased them not to condemn but to protect them, from the Imperium, from their brothers, perhaps even from himself. Their legions, loyal to the end, followed them into exile. The galaxy was told they never existed. In some far and hidden place beyond the Astronomican's light, they endure still. Two forgotten sons waiting for an age when mankind no longer needs a god. This theory is not imperial. It is whispered among renegade scholars, among those who look upon the Emperor not as a deity but as a man. They see tragedy where others see divinity. They imagine him not as the omnipotent ruler of a billion worlds, but as a father broken by the cost of perfection. To them, the Lost Primarchs are not a sin but a wound, a part of the Emperor he could not reconcile. If this is true, then his silence is not condemnation, it is mourning. The Emperor sits immobile on his golden throne, not merely because his body is dying, but because his soul cannot move under the weight of what he has done. The third theory is the most heretical of all. It claims the Lost Sons were not destroyed or exiled, but hidden, that they serve still, unseen as part of the Emperor's final design. In this version, the Erasure was camouflage. The two Primarchs and their legions were entrusted with a purpose so secret that even their brothers could not know it. They were removed from the Great Crusade to become something greater, guardians of a plan that would unfold long after the heresy, long after the Imperium itself had forgotten why it existed. Some claim they dwell in the void beyond the galaxy's rim, where no light reaches and no warp currents flow. Others believe they walk among humanity in new forms, guiding unseen, ensuring that the dream of the Emperor does not die entirely. If true, this theory would mean that the Imperium's greatest lie is also its last hope. That in the darkness beyond the stars, the lost sons still carry out their father's will, unseen but unbroken. Each theory contradicts the next, yet each holds its own truth. The Emperor was capable of all these things: wrath, mercy, and design. To choose one over the others is to reduce him to something smaller than he was. He is not a god of simplicity. He is a god of paradox, both destroyer and protector, tyrant and savior. The Father who creates and consumes. Perhaps all three theories are true, perhaps none. Perhaps what matters is not which happened, but that they were erased in the first place. For the Imperium, the mystery is more valuable than the answer. In not knowing, faith survives. In silence, obedience endures. To speak their names would be to fracture that faith, to remind the galaxy that its God once doubted, that its perfection was once flawed. The two Lost Primarchs are not just forgotten, they are forbidden. Their absence is a cage built around an idea too dangerous to hold, that the Emperor's love was not limitless, and his control was not complete. There are smaller, stranger theories too, the kind that thrive in the shadows of truth. Some claim the Lost Primarchs were never human at all, that their gene seed was corrupted by alien influence, by something ancient and terrible that predates the Emperor himself. Others believe the Primarch project yielded more than 20 children, and the two erased were experiments, abandoned templates, precursors to perfection. Some even whisper that they were twins born of the same genetic seed, reflecting two halves of a single will. If that were true, then perhaps they were never meant to be separate. Perhaps their fall was not defiance but reunion. And then there is the heresy spoken only by madmen and dying astropaths. The one that claims the lost sons did not vanish at all but ascended, that they transcended flesh and form, becoming something the Imperium cannot comprehend, that their father's design succeeded in ways that terrified even him. They became divine not through worship but through understanding. They stepped beyond the limits of the warp, beyond the reach of gods and demons alike. To the Imperium, such evolution is heresy. But to the cosmos, it may be the closest thing to salvation mankind has ever known. No matter which story one believes, all end in silence, because silence is the Emperor's final word. It is the only truth that remains unbroken. Theories are dangerous because they keep memory alive. They resist the machinery of forgetting. Each time someone asks, each time someone dares to wonder, the silence fractures a little more. The galaxy shifts, the warp stirs, the Emperor dreams. Somewhere beyond time and space, the two lost sons remain unnamed, but not unimagined. And in imagination there is power, because in the end that is what they have become. Not men, not gods, but stories. And stories cannot be erased. They change, they adapt, they endure. They whisper always in the language of dreams, reminding humanity that even in an empire built on certainty, there is still room for mystery. And perhaps that mystery is the last sacred thing the Imperium has left. No one knows what the Emperor felt when he chose to erase his sons. The Imperium teaches that he is beyond emotion, a being of pure logic and divine purpose, incapable of love, of rage, of sorrow. But those who have seen him, those who stood close enough to feel the hum of his presence, to see the shadow in his eyes, know otherwise. The Emperor of mankind was not a god pretending to be human. He was a human who became a god, and somewhere within that boundless will, the echo of humanity still lingered. It is said that the Emperor never sleeps, that his mind reaches across the galaxy, perceiving all at once, the death cries of worlds, the flickering prayers of the faithful, the whispering madness of the warp. But there was a time long ago when he did not hear everything, when he still walked among his children, still spoke with a voice, still saw through mortal eyes. It was then that the loss of two sons cut deepest. He had shaped them with his own hands, breathed his own will into their souls, sent them into the galaxy as light into darkness, and then by his own decree he extinguished them. There are no records of the moment it happened, no witness to the command that sealed their fate. Only the aftermath, the sudden stillness that fell over the palace, the way the Primarchs avoided his gaze in the days that followed. Malcador, the Sigillite, recorded in one of his sealed journals that he had never seen the Emperor so silent. He looked, the entry reads, not victorious but diminished, as if he had fought himself and lost. The rest of the page is blacked out. For the Emperor, grief could not be allowed. Emotion was weakness, weakness was failure, and failure could not exist within the design of divinity. So he turned his sorrow into silence, and that silence became the law of the Imperium. Yet beneath that perfection, the wound remained. It was not simply the loss of two sons, it was the loss of what they represented. They were proof that creation could disobey, proof that even the will of a god could fracture. The Emperor's grief was not like that of mortals. He could not cry, could not wail, could not speak the words of loss. His mourning was expressed in action, in the tightening of his rule, in the deepening of his control. After the Erasure, the Great Crusade grew harsher. Worlds that resisted were no longer offered peace, but subjugation. The dream of unity began to fade into the machinery of conquest. Perhaps it was not anger that drove him, but fear. Fear that the same defiance that took his lost sons would spread to the others. Fear that love would destroy what he had built. It is said that when a Primarch dies, the psychic echo of their passing resonates through the warp, like the tolling of a great bell. When two were erased, no sound was heard, but some claim the warp itself shuddered, as though something vast and sorrowful had been swallowed whole. The Emperor felt it. How could he not? They were part of him. The pain of that moment became part of his essence, buried deep, hidden beneath the layers of purpose and eternity. Lorgar once wrote that the Emperor wears his grief like armor. The words were condemned as heresy, but they carry a strange truth. In every image, every account of the Emperor's presence after that time, there is a stillness that was not there before. The light around him grew colder, his words shorter. He smiled less, spoke less, trusted less. It was as if a piece of him had gone missing, two lights extinguished, leaving the remaining 18 to shine in a colder sky. When Horus fell, when the heresy tore the galaxy apart, the Emperor's actions carried the same pattern. He met rebellion not with sorrow, but with silence. He gave no speeches, offered no forgiveness. His was not the wrath of a god betrayed. It was the weary certainty of a father who had already buried his sons once before. Those who fought beside him on Terra said that, in the final days when he faced Horus, his voice trembled not with rage, but with pity. It is possible that in that moment he remembered the others, the first he had lost, and understood that all his sons were walking toward the same fate. Grief in gods is different from grief in men. When mortals mourn, they seek comfort, remembrance, closure. When gods mourn, they reshape reality to hide it. The Emperor's grief became doctrine. The Imperium's refusal to speak of the Lost Primarchs is not just obedience, it is his own repression made manifest. He buried his pain so deeply that the galaxy itself was made to forget. But grief does not end when memory fades. It lingers, a pulse beneath the surface, invisible but constant. Some say the Emperor's throne is not only a prison of flesh but of regret, that as his mind drifts between light and void, he dreams of the faces he erased. That every flicker of the Astronomicon, the great psychic beacon that guides humanity through the warp, is not simply power but sorrow radiating through the immaterium, the light of his will, pulsing in grief. It is a haunting thought, that every ship which sails by that light is guided by mourning, that the Emperor's endless service to mankind is, in part, an act of penance. The custodes, silent watchers of the throne, speak to no one, but among themselves they have a legend, a secret passed from veteran to initiate. They say that once, long ago, before the heresy, they found the Emperor alone in the Vault of Rapture, a chamber filled with relics of the Primarch project. He stood before two empty pedestals, hands clasped behind his back, eyes closed. No words were spoken. When he turned, they saw his face was wet with something they did not understand. The custodes have no word for tears. They recorded it simply as condensation. But even gods have their moments of weakness. Perhaps the greatest proof of his grief is found in what he never did again. The Primarch project was never repeated. The gene tech that created them was locked away, its formulas scattered, its creators silenced. The Emperor made no more sons. Whatever he had hoped to achieve through them, he abandoned. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the Webway project, seeking to transcend humanity entirely, to build a world without war, without corruption, without the need for imperfect children. But it was too late. The heresy was coming. The wounds of the past were already festering. When the galaxy burned, when his empire crumbled, the Emperor sat upon his throne and did not speak. The last words he is known to have uttered before the final battle were to Malcador, "I have failed them all." No one knows which them he meant, the sons who rebelled, the ones who remained loyal, or the two who were lost before all others. The ecclesiarchy does not speak of the Emperor's grief. To acknowledge it would make him mortal, and mortality is forbidden in divinity. But in the quiet hours of night, when the priests finish their hymns and the lights of the sanctum flicker low, even they must wonder. What kind of God erases his children? What kind of father builds a world where forgetting is the only form of forgiveness? Perhaps the Emperor's greatest tragedy is not that he lost his sons, but that he could not mourn them. To love and destroy, to remember and forbid remembrance. These are contradictions that no God can bear forever. They are the weight of humanity carried into eternity. The Imperium may never know the truth, but somewhere in the deep psychic hum of the throne, where the Emperor's consciousness flickers between light and shadow, two voices still linger. They do not accuse, they do not beg, they simply exist, echoes of what was once whole, fragments of what was once love. And perhaps in his endless silence, the Emperor listens. The Imperium pretends that the lost legions are gone, but the void they left behind never truly closed. It lingers in the hearts and blood of the Astartes, in their numbers, in their oaths, in the strange quiet that passes over them when they speak of brotherhood. Every legion carries a trace of what was removed. Even after 10,000 years, the echo endures, quiet but unyielding. When the Great Crusade began, 20 legions marched beneath 20 banners. They were the Emperor's army of light, perfect soldiers born of divine flesh, each legion mirroring the soul of its Primarch. The 2nd and the 11th stood among them. They fought, they conquered, they bled as any others. Then one day, they were gone, their heraldry erased, their colors struck from record, their victories reassigned to others. To those who survived, it was as though they had been dreamt rather than born, but dreams leave impressions. In the deep archives of the Ultramarines, there are training manuals that refer to battle doctrines no longer taught. The designations attached to those strategies correspond to the missing numbers, 2 and 11. The official explanation is transcription error, but there are too many, too precise to be accident. The same pattern appears among the Imperial fists, the Dark Angels, the White Scars. In tactical litanies chanted before battle, there are stanzas missing, pauses that once held meaning. In those moments of silence, even the youngest Astartes feel something stir, an instinct with no memory to anchor it. The genetic memory of the Primarchs is not perfect. Yet there are moments when a Space Marine dreams, in the half-sleep induced by cryostasis or the delirium of the apothecarian. They see faces they cannot name. Sometimes two, one crowned with light, one shrouded in shadow. Some wake weeping, though they do not know why. The chaplains call it psychic noise. The Tech Marines call it gene seed resonance. The Inquisition calls it nothing at all. But the pattern repeats across legions, across millennia. The echo cannot be excised. The legions that remained after the erasure bore the weight differently. Some became colder, as if a part of their soul had been cauterized. Others grew more zealous, more desperate to prove their loyalty, as though to fill the gap left by the fallen. The Blood Angels, for all their grace and fury, carry in their songs a note of mourning that predates their own tragedy. The Space Wolves fight with an anger that seems older than themselves. The Imperial fists build walls they do not need, as though trying to hold back something unseen. These are not coincidences. They are inheritances, psychic scars left by the loss of two brothers no one remembers but everyone feels. Even the Chaos Legions scattered among the stars remember. During the heresy, when the galaxy drowned in blood, traitor Astartes were known to speak of the forgotten. In the corrupted hymns of the word-bearers, two verses are always missing. The sons of Horus, before their fall, painted 20 stars upon the walls of their flagship. 2 were blacked out. In the madness of rebellion, even the damned remember what the righteous deny. It is said that the warp does not forget. When a soul is erased, its shadow lingers there, drifting, formless but unbroken. There are places deep within the Imperium where psychic echoes take shape, where old emotions feed upon themselves until they become something more. Some navigators tell of seeing two presences moving through the warp like distant constellations, twin lights orbiting each other, flickering in and out of existence. They are not gods nor demons, they are absence given form. Among the Ordo Astartes, a quiet theory circulates, shared only in whispered code. It holds that the gene seed of the lost legions was not destroyed but dispersed. When the Emperor ordered the purges, not every strain could be eliminated. Fragments of the lost line may still run in the blood of other chapters. If true, then the Imperium itself carries the memory in its veins. Perhaps that is why the Space Marines are restless, why they wage war without end, because some part of them remembers the brothers who were unmade. There are reports, too, of chapters whose genetic purity has always been suspect. The cursed foundings, the aberrant strains, the ones whose behavior does not match their lineage. The executioners, whose honor borders on obsession. The lamenters, whose sorrow feels eternal. The black dragons, born monstrous but loyal. The exorcists, created to resist demonic possession, their methods hidden even from the Inquisition. Perhaps these are not coincidences, but consequences. Perhaps the lost legions still speak through the flaws of their kin. In some of the earliest devotional murals painted before the heresy, the 20 Primarchs are shown as a circle of light around the Emperor. Each halo distinct, yet connected by thin lines of gold. In later versions, 2 of those lights are missing, but the lines remain. The artists did not remove them, they could not. Even when their names were struck from the archives, even when their symbols were defaced, the geometry of unity endured. The Emperor's perfection demanded 20. His reality endures at 18. The contradiction sits at the heart of the Imperium, humming like a note that never resolves. Some of the Primarchs spoke of it carefully in moments of weakness. After the Council of Nicaea, Magnus the Red wrote in his private journals that the pattern of 20 cannot be broken, only hidden. When Guilliman rebuilt the Imperium in the years after the heresy, he ensured the legions were split into chapters of roughly 1,000 men. 20 chapters formed the core of the Codex's model structure. When asked why 20, he said only, It is balance. Whether by accident or memory, he rebuilt the missing pattern in miniature, unable to escape the shape his father once designed. Even 10,000 years later, the echo continues to ripple. Every new founding begins with the same ritual, the same numbering, the same pauses. The clerks of the administratum may not know why, but they follow the pattern as though guided by instinct. To break it would feel wrong. The lost legions have become ghosts in the machinery, directing the empire they no longer serve. In the black ships that ferry psychers to Terra, those gifted or cursed with true sight sometimes speak of two presences that linger near the Astronomicon. One feels warm, calm, protective, the other cold, sharp, watchful. The astropaths call them the Sentinels. The ecclesiarchy calls them superstition. But those who have touched the Emperor's light know its source is not singular. It is layered. It vibrates with multiplicity, as though two notes are hidden beneath the great choir of his will. Perhaps they are what remains of the lost sons, bound to their father's beacon, forever keeping vigil over the light they once defied. The legions themselves, scattered now into countless chapters, carry the echo in more than ritual. They feel it in their dreams, in their wars, in the moments between. They cannot remember the names, but they remember the feeling, the unity that was broken, the silence that followed. The Emperor's grief became their inheritance, and through them it spread to the galaxy entire. The Imperium's endless war is more than duty. It is mourning made infinite. Every world conquered, every heretic burned, every hymn recited is an attempt to fill the void left by the lost. If the Lost Primarchs could see their brothers now, what would they think? Would they recognize the empire their father built? Would they see the shadow of their own absence in every fortress and shrine? Or would they see only the silence, still spreading, still devouring as the galaxy forgets what it was meant to remember? The echo will never fade completely. It cannot. It lives in the pattern of everything that followed, in the gaps between numbers, in the spaces between words, in the quiet between heartbeats. The Imperium will go on pretending the circle was always incomplete, that perfection was always 18. But the warp remembers 20, the soul of mankind remembers 20, and somewhere deep within the Emperor's mind, perhaps 20 still stand. The Imperium thrives on certainty. Its faith demands it, its power depends on it. To live within its dominion is to be told that everything has purpose, every decree is divine, every silence intentional. The machinery of belief leaves no room for doubt. And yet behind the curtain of that perfect illusion, the truth of the Lost Primarchs remains. The one flaw the Imperium cannot polish away. The one secret too vast to destroy completely. To speak of them is forbidden, but to think of them is inevitable. Their absence invites thought the way a wound invites pain. In that void, questions multiply, heresies bloom. Every inquisitor who has ever studied the erased archives comes to the same conclusion. The Imperium's greatest power is not its armies nor its gods, but its ability to edit reality. To decide what has always been true and what never was. The truth behind the curtain is not that the Lost Primarchs were erased. It is that everything in the Imperium is constantly being erased and rewritten, until memory itself becomes a tool of control. The two lost sons are not anomalies, they are examples. The Emperor did not simply strike them from record, he demonstrated what could be done to any truth that no longer served him. The erasure of the lost legions was the first purification of history, the beginning of a tradition that would one day consume the entire species. The Adeptus Administratum rewrote the ledgers, the Ecclesiarchy rewrote the scripture, the Inquisition rewrote morality, and mankind forgot. They forgot the 2nd and the 11th, and then they forgot that they had forgotten. What was once a crime became myth. What was once tragedy became mystery. The wound healed over, but the scar remained. The curtain, of course, is not merely symbolic. On Terra itself, beneath the Imperial Palace, there are chambers sealed since the Great Crusade. Whole wings of the archives have been walled off, their existence omitted from even the most secret cartographs. The few who have seen the sealed doors describe vast slabs of gold and obsidian inscribed with numerals that no longer exist. There are rumors that behind those doors lie the original records, the unedited truth. But the locks are not mechanical, they are psychic. They respond only to the Emperor's will, and he does not open them. Malcador once said, "Truth is the first sacrifice of empire." If that is so, then the Lost Primarchs were the offering. The erasure of their names was not simply punishment, it was purification. The Imperium that rose from their silence was stronger, colder, less human. The Emperor no longer sought to inspire love, he sought only obedience. The curtain was drawn to protect his creation from itself. But the truth behind the curtain is not merely historical, it is metaphysical. It reveals something about the nature of the Emperor, and by extension the universe itself. If the Emperor could unmake reality with will alone, erase two suns so completely that even their memory vanished, then the Imperium's faith is not misplaced. He is a god. But if he could not truly destroy them, if their echoes remain, if they still stir in the warp or whisper through the gene seed of their brothers, then he is not omnipotent, he is fallible. The curtain hides not only history but limitation. There are those within the Inquisition who have sought to tear that curtain down. They are known as the Ordo Chronos, an order so secret that most inquisitors deny its existence. Their work is to trace causality, to hunt contradictions in the time stream of human record. Their greatest heresy is a belief whispered among themselves, that the erasure of the Lost Primarchs damaged the fabric of fate, that by editing the past, the Emperor fractured the pattern of destiny itself. The great heresy, the age of strife, the endless decline, all of it may be the echo of that first act of deletion, as if the universe itself rejected the erasure. If this is true, then the Lost Primarchs are not simply forgotten. They are missing pieces of reality, torn out of existence, leaving the galaxy unbalanced. Some claim this imbalance manifests as psychic instability, as mutation, as chaos itself, that the warp feasts upon absence as much as emotion. The lost suns then are not gone but inverted, turned inside out by their father's will, their absence feeding the very corruption he sought to contain. And if so, perhaps they did not fall to chaos. Perhaps they became it. Other scholars offer a different interpretation. They argue that the erasure was not an accident but a safeguard, that the Emperor, foreseeing the heresy, built within the fabric of history a compartment, a sealed truth that could one day be reopened. The two missing Primarchs, their legions, their legacy, all of it hidden in some distant fold of the materium or the warp, waiting to be restored when mankind is ready. If the Emperor is truly immortal, if his consciousness still guides the Imperium from the Golden Throne, then perhaps the curtain is not concealment but preservation. The two lost sons may be the seed of his resurrection. The problem with truth in the Imperium is that it is never singular. There is always another layer, another motive, another secret buried beneath the last. Every revelation is just another curtain waiting to be pulled aside. The scholars who pursue the mystery of the Lost Primarchs inevitably find themselves lost in recursion, trapped between myth and evidence, faith and logic. They begin by seeking two names and end by doubting the nature of reality itself. Because in the Imperium, truth and faith are the same thing. Both depend on belief, and belief, like the warp, reshapes what is real. In the great libraries of Terra, beneath endless cathedrals of data, there are priests who copy the same records over and over, generation after generation. They do not understand the words they preserve. They simply obey. To them, the empty numbers 2 and 11 are not mystery but liturgy. They are recited because they must be. In that repetition, meaning dies and faith endures. The curtain is not only maintained by the Emperor, it is woven anew by every believer who refuses to question. But cracks appear even in gold. In recent centuries, among the Adeptus Mechanicus, there have been reports of data anomalies in the Noospheric archives, patterns repeating where none should. References to erased legions appearing in unrelated files, as though the past itself were bleeding back through the code. The Magi call it corruption. The Inquisition calls it blasphemy. But the pattern is spreading. Some claim the machine spirit remembers what man has tried to forget. The warp, too, seems restless. The Astronomicon flickers. The choir of psychers murmurs in sleep. They hear voices, two among billions, calling faintly through the immaterium. Not words, but emotions. Sorrow, patience. A longing so vast it feels like gravity. The adepts dismiss it as noise, but the most sensitive among them swear that the voices come from within the Emperor's own light, not beyond it. The curtain is thin. It always has been. The truth presses against it like breath on glass. The Imperium believes that to tear it would bring ruin, that behind it lies madness. Perhaps they are right, but perhaps behind it lies something else, something the Emperor feared but could not destroy. The truth behind the curtain is not simply who the Lost Primarchs were, it is what they represent. They are the embodiment of the Emperor's failure to control everything. They are proof that even gods make mistakes and that those mistakes cannot be contained forever. They are the shadow of perfection, the flaw that makes the light believable. In the end, the Imperium's greatest secret is also its greatest confession, that it needs its ghosts. The Lost Primarchs are gone, but their absence gives meaning to everything that remains. Without them, the story would be too simple. Without them, the Emperor would be too perfect. And perfection in a universe like this would be unworthy of worship. Behind the curtain, the truth waits, not to destroy faith, but to complete it. And perhaps one day, when the Emperor finally rises from his throne, when the Astronomicon burns brighter than it ever has before, that curtain will lift, and the galaxy will see, not two missing suns, but two returning lights, carrying the memory of all that was lost. Until then, the silence remains, the curtain holds, the curtain, and the Imperium sleeps beneath the weight of its own forgetting. There are silences so deep that they become voices of their own. Silences that do not simply hold the absence of sound, but the presence of something vast, something waiting to be remembered. The story of the Lost Primarchs ends not with answers, but with this silence. It hums beneath every prayer, it lingers in the warp, it breathes between the words of Scripture. For 10,000 years, the Imperium has spoken of perfection, unity, divinity. And yet, even at its brightest, it cannot escape the shadow of what was erased. The two who were lost are more than history, they are memory itself. Memory denied, buried, burned, but never truly gone. When the Emperor created his sons, he did not simply craft warriors, he made mirrors. Each Primarch reflected a fragment of his soul. Pride, courage, intellect, fury, compassion, and doubt. He poured pieces of himself into them so that they could conquer what he could not face alone. But to lose two mirrors is to fracture the reflection. The Imperium now gazes upon its god and sees only part of what he is. The missing pieces remain somewhere hidden, whispering in the dark. The Lost Primarchs have become the most human part of the Emperor's legend. Not because of what they did, but because they failed, and because their father could not bear it. They represent the emotion that the Imperium forbids: regret. Their erasure is his confession, and his silence is the echo of that confession stretching through time. Across the galaxy, from the frozen cathedrals of Terra to the dying embers of forgotten worlds, there are still those who feel them. Astartes who dream of brothers they never had. Astropaths who hear voices in the hum of the Astronomicon. pilgrims who swear that in moments of prayer they see two faint silhouettes standing beside the Emperor's golden light. One cloaked in shadow, the other radiant, both watching with impossible sorrow. They are not gods, not demons, not myth. They are the part of the story that refuses to end. In the secret halls of the Inquisition, some records speak of an anomaly that predates even the heresy. Two fragments of psychic resonance recorded deep within the warp, distinct but harmonious. One pulsing with calm reason, the other with fierce, unyielding will. The magos who detected them named them Echo Primus and Echo Secundus. When the Inquisition seized the data, the magos vanished. His laboratory was sealed, his name erased from every machine. But the echoes remain. They appear now and then, faint as breath, as if someone were still out there, trying to be remembered. The ecclesiarchy calls such stories heresy. They insist that the Emperor is whole, that his light needs no shadow. But deep down, they know better. Even gods cast reflections they cannot control. The Imperium itself is proof, a monument to both his brilliance and his failure. Every world it conquers is a reminder of the light that was lost. Every prayer it chants is a plea to fill the void it denies. Perhaps that is the true tragedy. Not that the lost sons were destroyed, but that their absence became necessary. Without them, the Imperium's faith hardened into certainty. Without them, humanity forgot its fragility. The Emperor's silence became the pattern for all creation. And so the Imperium learned not to grieve, not to question, not to remember. But memory is the oldest truth in the galaxy. It survives in ways no empire can erase. It hides in the collective soul of mankind, in dreams, in stories, in the flicker of warp light that guides lost ships home. It endures in the quiet between the stars, in the space between 18 and 20, in the space between faith and doubt. That is where the lost sons live now. Not in archives or temples, but in the idea that there is always more to know, always something hidden behind the perfection of the Emperor's gaze. Somewhere, perhaps, they wait. If the Emperor truly exists beyond his throne, if his consciousness moves through the warp, shaping and observing the fates of worlds, then he must feel them still. His creations cannot truly vanish. They are part of him. When the Astronomicon burns brightest, when its pulse grows irregular, perhaps it is not malfunction. Perhaps it is memory. Perhaps for a brief instant the Emperor remembers the sound of their voices, and in that memory the galaxy trembles. For what would happen if he truly remembered? What would happen if the lost sons returned, not as saviors, not as monsters, but as what they were always meant to be? The unfinished thoughts of a god, the forgotten truths of a universe built on denial. Would the Imperium fall? Or would it finally understand itself? No one knows. Perhaps no one ever will. The Emperor's light endures, but it endures through silence. The Lost Primarchs remain unspoken because to speak them would unmake everything built upon their absence. Faith requires forgetting. Belief requires blindness. And the Imperium would rather die than open its eyes. But not all silence lasts forever. There are cracks forming in the void. In the warp, the Astronomicon flickers more often. In the dreams of psychers, two shapes appear where before there was one. The Emperor's golden light casts a longer shadow now, stretching farther across the stars. And in that shadow, some claim to see movement. The forgotten sons do not need to return to exist. Their existence is the doubt that survives in the hearts of men, the soft question that faith cannot kill. They live in the unease that comes when certainty feels too perfect, in the quiet realization that even gods make mistakes, and that perhaps those mistakes are what make them real. The Imperium calls them lost, but loss is not the same as absence. Even the most perfect silence hums with the memory of sound. And so the story ends as it began, with the Emperor, alone in his golden tomb, surrounded by light, yet shadowed by his own creation. The galaxy prays, the faith endures, the war never ends. But somewhere beyond all of it, in the far reaches of the warp, two lights drift side by side, waiting, watching. They are the unspoken truth, the erased memory, the part of the dream the Emperor could not bear to finish. They are the forgotten sons, and in the silence of eternity, they remember. And so, we return to silence. The galaxy sleeps beneath the weight of 10,000 years of war, its stars whispering with secrets that no one dares to name. The truth of the Lost Primarchs drifts like dust through the void, unseen, unclaimed, but never gone. Perhaps the Emperor still hears them. Perhaps we all do in our dreams, echoes of a past that refuses to fade, calling from somewhere beyond memory. If you've wandered with me this far through the quiet halls of forgotten history, then let the silence carry you now. Close your eyes. Imagine the Emperor's light fading into dusk, the hum of the Astronomicon soft and distant, and the two forgotten sons still waiting, still watching in the dark between the stars. Thank you for listening, and for remembering what the Imperium tried to forget. If you'd like to keep traveling these hidden paths of Warhammer's forgotten lore, you can stay a while longer. There are always more secrets buried beneath the silence, more ghosts in the machine. Until then, rest well, traveler of the void, and may the Emperor protect your dreams.